Welcome to Thriller Vault. Tonight I have the harrowing true story of U.S. Army nurse Irene Vaughn Green and her experience in the Vietnam War. This story is one of many told to my friend and fellow author William F. Brown. He collected hundreds of first-hand accounts and published them in a 5-book series entitled Our Vietnam Wars. Here is Triage. I was an RN and board-certified nurse anesthetist at Boston City Hospital, one of the best in the country, making $67.50 per week working in the neurosurgical operating room, but I wanted to do more. I'd seen one too many news reports with Dan Rather hiding behind a wall and Way complaining about how Marines were outnumbered and out of ammunition. Well, I thought, maybe they'd have had more room for bullets on that helicopter if they didn't have to fly your fat ass around. Okay, so what was I going to do about it? There was a war going on over there. Young kids were wounded and dying, and I decided to help. First, I went to the Navy recruiters, and they wanted to give me stateside duty for 2 years before they'd send me to Vietnam. Same for the Air Force. The Army, on the other hand, asked how soon I could leave. 1 week later, I was a first lieutenant at the medical center in Fort Sam Houston. 6 weeks after that, on July 4th, 1969, Independence Day, I arrived at Long Binh with 5 other nurses waiting to be assigned. I had several friends at Da Nang and asked if I could go there. No, they said. They had a critical need for a nurse anesthetist at Chu Lai, but it was only 40 miles south of Da Nang. Just around the corner, I thought. What they didn't tell me was that these 40 miles were through enemy country. Besides, Chu Lai was on the ocean, and being from Boston, that sounded cool. Then I found out a nurse had been killed at Chu Lai when a rocket struck one of the hospital wards a couple of weeks before I arrived. I was assigned to the 91st EVAC, which was replacing the 312th EVAC, a reserve unit heading home to North Carolina. The net result was a lot of staff who hadn't worked with each other or worked in wartime triage medicine. The casualties came to us direct from the battlefield in medevac helicopters. Our job was to sort them out and decide who went to the operating room first based on who we could save, stabilize them, and send them on to the big hospital in Japan. I worked in the OR my whole tour. We were staffed with all the major surgical specialties, from neurosurgical to orthopedic, thoracic, and the rest. And we had 6 nurse anesthetists. 2 were regular Army, 2 were from the 312th, and 2 of us were new. We worked 12-hour shifts from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., but one more nurse was always on call. At the beginning, the on-call shift was 36 hours. That proved too intense and was cut back to 24 hours. But when the fighting picked up and helicopters kept coming, it was all hands on deck for as long as it took. In addition to the doctors and nurses, we had medical specialists, or scrub techs, who had more training than a combat medic and got the patients stripped, cleaned, and prepped, and then helped the doctors and nurses in surgery. They were amazing. The operating rooms were in 2 Quonset huts, open on the ends, so you could look from one end to the other and see what was going on. Periodically, we came under fire from rockets at night. After a while, you got used to it, superficially anyway. If we were in the OR or on duty, we'd put on helmets and flak jackets and keep working. When there was incoming, you could hear it, and our orders were to get under the tables. The first time it happened, I remained on my feet looking after a patient. Afterward, the CO told me the next time, I would get under the table with everybody else. It was our duty. If the medical staff gets wounded, a lot of patients would suffer. The doctors and nurses lived in wooden barracks-like buildings. I was given a single room because I was on call so often. At first, we didn't have a bunker. Finally, they built one, a concrete half-pipe. At night, rockets or not, no one wanted to be the first one to go in. Between some really big spiders, rats, snakes, and the smell, we stopped going. The only thing most people know about Army medicine is from the TV show MASH, and I'm often asked how accurate I think it is. As everyone knows, it was Vietnam stories and characters set in Korea, because no one wanted to see a comedy about Vietnam. All things considered, MASH was fairly accurate. Our surgeons were excellent like theirs, the nurses were busy, the CO was a joke, and the head nurse was pukey. We even had a Catholic priest, but he wasn't like theirs. And there was a lot of drinking. It was a necessary relief and saved my sanity. One night, we got off at midnight, grabbed a case of beer, went to the top of a sand dune looking out on the South China Sea, and drank the whole thing. In November, I got a call that they had an emergency need for a nurse anesthetist at the 18th Surgical Hospital up at Camp Evans near the DMZ. I was the newbie, so off I went. The hospital was a new concept, a portable Quonset hut they rolled out of the back of a C-130, hooked up to a jet engine and inflated. Living and working there was horrible. I stayed 3 weeks and came back with a huge new appreciation for the comforts we had at Chu Lai. In December, the Bob Hope Christmas show came to Chu Lai. In addition to his entertainers and singers, he brought Neil Armstrong, the astronaut, whom I got to meet. Like Radar O'Reilly, I developed an ear for incoming choppers. One day, there were a group of them coming in, and I immediately ran to the OR. There were 2 big MPs standing in front of the door, blocking my way. I tried to get in, and they wouldn't let me. "You don't want to go in there, ma'am," they kept telling me, but I managed to push my way inside anyway. On the gurneys were open body bags with 6 dead Marines. They had been a civil action team working in one of the villages, and the VC had captured them. Their hands were tied, and they had all been beheaded. It was the worst thing I saw over there. That was bad enough, but in the center of the room, 2 of our doctors were fighting. One had a camera and was trying to take photographs of the bodies, probably for some anti-war newspaper, but our senior doctor wouldn't let him. He pulled the camera away and smashed it on the floor. When my tour was over, I still had 9 months left to serve in the Army and was sent to Fort Dix, New Jersey. When I was discharged, I went back to my old job at Boston City. I found myself doing the same stuff I did before, but after Vietnam, I felt I was wasting my time and my skills trying to save scumbags and gangbangers. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and I quit. I tried a string of other things, even taking aircraft maintenance classes at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona. Unfortunately, the airlines weren't hiring when I got out, so I took what I thought would be a short-time position at the Boston VA hospital. Turned out I loved it, or at least I loved working with the soldiers. But after 25 years, I retired, fed up with how political the VA had become. However, I had stayed in the reserves and retired as a lieutenant colonel in 1996. Like so many of the men who served in Vietnam, I developed Agent Orange-related diabetes, no doubt from all the spraying that was done around Chu Lai and from the residue that was all over the uniforms and bodies of the boys we treated in the OR. Later, when I worked for the VA, I once asked one of their top people, "If you diagnose and treat prostate cancer, what is the incidence of breast cancer among female vets?" Not only didn't they know the answer to that question, but they had no firm number on how many women served in Vietnam to begin with. It was roughly 8,000, but there have been no studies. After I retired from the VA, my husband and I moved to South Carolina, where we live on the water, raise chickens and dogs, and just enjoy the good life. Author's note. I have often told other male vets that none of us had it as bad as the Army and Navy nurses who took care of us on the hospital ships or in the field hospitals, working 12-hour shifts 7 days a week and getting the same Agent Orange exposure and PTSD as we did. Irene's story proves the point. Thank you so much for watching and listening to Thriller Vault. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you enjoyed this story, please check out William F. Brown's Our Vietnam Wars for more true Vietnam stories. I hope to see you all next week for another thriller story.